Theo, welcome to the Mindshift podcast. How are we doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Good, good. It's been a long time coming. I think we've been speaking on LinkedIn for a good few years. So yeah,
Hmm.
it's nice to have you on. Um, but yeah, I guess Theo, the first question I ask my guests whenever they come onto my show is give me a summary, a log line of who you are, what you do. What would yours be?
Um, Good question. The immediate thing that pops into mind is I am a thorn in the side of many industry analysts.
Okay, okay. There's a lot to jump into on that one. Okay, cool. And we will come back to that. And usually I ask my guests to roll the dice. So I guess pick a number between 1 and 12.
Oh, do you know what? I'm gonna put this in the hands of Google. I'm gonna roll a d12,
Okay.
and the number comes back number five. Here we go.
Number 5. Okay. So the question, which I'm going to give you, which I don't need to know the answer for now because we'll come back to it, is um, what's the one life lesson you've learned the hard way? Okay. So we'll come back to that a little bit later on.
Right.
Okay, cool. So I guess yeah, like obviously, I followed you for a while, Theo, but I guess for my listeners, maybe they've not come across you yet. So maybe yeah, if you could give us a bit of a timeline around who you are, and yeah, a bit of a brief around your kind of career, I guess.
Okay. Well, I am what's regarded as a futurist in inverted commas. I spend a lot of my time studying trends, past historical trends, current trends, and projecting those into future trends. So trying to track, where's technology and society going, what's good and what's bad, what are the potential possible futures that we have ahead of us if we take certain decisions. And I try and document these and discuss these with business leaders and so on to try and help them prepare for certain trends and what customers are interested in, what clients are doing, what technologies are going to disrupt their industries or their businesses. And I've been doing this for the best part of, I don't know, 10, 15 years, but I've been in the technology sector for about 20, 25 in various guises. So I'm an old fart now, believe it or not. Um, I started my career working in banks, in transformation programs, doing project and program management. Worked with vendors, software vendors, to basically help sell their stuff, but also evangelize what the industry is doing, what the technologies could do, bringing the customer stories to life, that kind of thing. I've done a lot of keynote speaking. I do a lot of writing online. I've written a book. If anyone's bored and has insomnia one evening, you can buy it and then read it. And that's about that was actually a collaborative effort with a number of other futurists as well. So we covered a broad spectrum of topics, and that was quite an interesting project in itself. So yeah, I don't have a career in inverted commas. I would like to consider it as a kit bag of experience,
Nice.
because I've done lots of different things, and I do that because it interests me and it keeps my brain buzzing.
Nice. And I want to touch on a book, The Future Starts Now. And I think I enjoyed that book. I actually remember reading that book on the decking in the back garden. It was one of them I was like, oh, it felt like every chapter felt really connected, but then different. I
Mm.
really enjoyed it. Um, and I will needle in on that actually a little bit later on. But I guess my listeners like to know a little bit about the kind of the Theo before he is the man today. When you was younger and the teacher said, "Listen, Theo, what do you want to be when you grow up?" What did you say when you was younger?
I had a number of crazy ideas. So I was heavily into science fiction and Dungeons and Dragons and things. I was a proper nerd in that sense of the word, and I would read comic books and things like that. And when I was younger, I wanted to be a science officer on a naval vessel, and I was heavily influenced by Star Trek. Um, and then later on, I wanted to be an architect because I found I was quite good at technical drawing. but unfortunately, my grades weren't that great. So I actually looked at law, and I did an HND in legal studies, and then became a paralegal for a couple of years.
Oh wow.
And that's when I discovered that law was deathly dull in the UK. It was not like LA Law and all the glamorous US TV shows that I used to watch back then. It was more like Crown Court in the UK, and it was boring as fuck. But it was really interesting because as a paralegal and a court runner, I actually had more practical knowledge than people who were graduating university, because a lot of what they did was theory. They never actually got to see what a court document looked like, how to lodge a court document, etc. It was all very much a case of learning legal precedents and everything else. But I was knee deep in the process itself, collecting documents, writing the documents, lodging the documents, getting the notes back to the solicitors, etc. So I had a bit of a well-rounded experience in those couple of years, but that kind of sort of led me to, oh god, this is horrible and dull, and so I left that behind, and I jumped into the banking system, and I worked my way up for about 5 years until I got to the IT department, and that's really when things kind of took off because banks back then, and this is we're talking 95, 98. Banks back then, they were just starting to implement PCs. They were they heavily used what they called terminals back then, which were literally dumb terminals attached to a mainframe. And then they started to implement PCs. And because I was a geek and I had, you know, consoles, I had, what was an Amstrad CPC 464 for anyone who's as old as I am who remembers these. It was like the Spectrum 48K and the Acorn and the Commodore. So I used to love playing around on that, um, writing out games from the back of magazines, etc. So I was quite au fait with PCs when they first entered the workplace. But it was really funny looking back now, watching people who were, I would consider, middle aged, struggling to understand what I did with a mouse or what you do with a mouse and how you control things and stuff like that. Whereas to me, it was very natural. And I knew that this was a great place for me to basically springboard into helping people change their attitudes, doing software and business change. So from IT and doing business process reengineering, etc., um, I did that for a number of years, and I started to write about that. So I started to write about what I was seeing on the ground versus what I was reading in industry papers and reading Gartner and Forrester reports. And they would say, "Oh yes, the C-suite wants to do this, that, the next thing, and these are the next biggest trends." And I was writing from the ground floor, the shop floor, essentially, basically thinking to myself, "No, that nothing like this is actually happening on the ground floor. People aren't interested in that, and the C-suite and the execs have got far bigger things to worry about." So um, so that's when I became kind of like I said at the beginning, the log line, which is a thorn in the side, because my writing grew notoriety for basically tackling these issues head on and not being afraid to say it like it was. I used
Mm.
to get comments on LinkedIn and things like that, and privately via the blog, basically saying, "Oh, thanks for saying things that we can't openly say because we pay these analysts for their reports and things like that, but we can't challenge them
Mm.
on what they say. But you're I was independent. I didn't care. So I grew a good following out of that, and that was probably about 2008 to 2014. I blogged heavily, sometimes 4 or 5 times a day,
Wow.
on ideas that would just come to me, and I would write something, and it became second nature to write.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of like a bit of background, and all that effort that I put in, I eventually got picked up by a German software company to be their chief evangelist. Because I
Mm.
actually went to their industry conference, and I wrote a blog titled "Nice Legs, Shame About the Face," and it kind of picked apart their marketing department, because my takeaway from that industry conference that I went to was, they've got some great tech, but they just couldn't market it or tell a story to save themselves. Because it's a German company, and German software, especially German software companies back then, were very heavily product driven. So this is the product. We have released a new feature, and it is a blue button this time instead of a red button. And they never spoke about why the clients loved them or anything else like that. So so I wrote that blog, and I actually got contacted the next day by the COO, who said, "I read your blog, and I agree with everything you've said, and can we come in and have a chat?" And I came in a week later into their office in Bracknell, just outside of Reading, and yeah, kind of offered me the chief evangelist role to try and help them turn their storytelling thing around.
Wow.
So I think I could probably say that I was probably the first chief evangelist in the UK back then, because it was very an American driven title. It was, you had Robert Scoble at Rackspace, you had Guy Kawasaki at Apple, who were regarded as chief evangelists of those particular companies. But I don't think there were any chief evangelist type roles kicking around in Europe, and certainly the UK at that point in time. So yeah, it was an interesting time.
I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I think it's funny, you mentioned around the kind of there's like an Instagram versus reality. This is what everyone's saying, but the reality is in the weeds, in the trenches, this is actually what's really happening,
Hmm.
which I really like. Um, but the kind of chief evangelist, even now today, that term still feels like that role, that term still feels like it's a bit surrounded in mystery, I guess, to a certain point. Um, so why should every company have one? Like, why should they? I guess is probably the first question I'm thinking about there.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a blog about, well, not well, I wrote a blog and eventually got picked up by Forbes and VentureBeat um, on that particular subject, and it is a very kind of sort of nebulous concept, and a lot of people are scared to consider something like this, because how do you attach a KPI to someone's job? It is to essentially be a rainmaker and get people excited about what you do. Um, and a lot of it is, well, it's market perception. Product marketing and traditional marketing, and running events and doing so forth. Product marketing type activities and sending out newsletters and things only do so much. You really have to have a personality behind a lot of the marketing side of things, and that was essentially me. And my take on the whole chief evangelist role was to you know have an opinion, state an opinion, and get people talking about the company and about the products and about that opinion, and challenging some of the industry norms, um, being a connector or a glue between the product development team, the marketing team, and the customer success teams. Because essentially, I got to speak with clients and understood their problems, and then translated those problems and success stories back to marketing, back to product development, back to sales, and to say, I'm having, because I didn't have an agenda, which made it really relatable for people to just to have a conversation like you and I are having, a pub conversation. What's going on in the business? Blah blah blah. Tell me about this. How are you using our software? I wasn't there to put, to sell, so they felt more comfortable just having a conversation. And of course, I could take that back and say, well, look, you guys are pushing too hard on this. They're not interested, but they really want help with something else. Um, we're missing a lot of features in X, Y, and Z, and our customers are crying out for it. So why are we not moving this up the product development cycle, etc., etc. So it gave them a it gave the company a deeper understanding of what their clients were wanting versus what the industry analysts were saying was in the hot topic of of the day.
Mm,
And then it was easily to translate for me into customer stories and to tell different stories to the analysts, to the industry, to different clients, blog about it, speak about it in industry conferences, etc. So it really was this kind of like spokesperson in a completely different capacity to what you would expect from a board member or a C-suite, or a chief exec or one of the chiefs, because they were very, they're very constrained by marketing, PR people, red tape, whereas I
mm,
had a very loose agenda and I could just, rattle the cage a little bit. Obviously, get my knuckles rapped from time to time, but at the same time, it elevated that share of voice in a way that product marketing or marketing efforts can't.
mm. It seems to me, obviously, the futurist is, and we'll get into what that kind of that term means, but it feels like there's a real art of provocation to the futurist role as well. There's like, and when I say provocation, I mean asking the provocative questions as well. Um, but I guess before we get into the future and the futurist and whatever else, if I was to ask you now, you've got a treasure chest from now all the way back to when you was a child, I guess, and you could fill that treasure chest with just one memory. What would be the memory you would put in there?
Oh, I mean, does it have to be career?
Nope.
It can be anything.
Yeah, absolutely anything.
Um, Blimey. Hmm. I might have to come back to that one.
Yeah, no, that's perfectly fine. I think this is the perks. I get to know the questions, and my guests don't get to know.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's the term futurist. I think you ask 100 different people what that means, and you get
Hmm.
100 different answers. And I guess for the listeners, my world is predominantly in people experience and culture and creating better workplaces for innovation and whatever else. Um, but what does the word futurist mean? Like, what does it mean to you? I guess.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, you ask 100 different people, you get 100 different answers. Um, for me, it's not about prediction, it's about preparation. Um,
Okay.
so, you know, as a futurist, I can present multiple different paths or multiple different options for people asking me particular questions or business leaders wanting to know what is this technology going to do for me or what's the latest trend and all this kind of sort of thing. And it's trying to help people navigate to what can be the correct decisions for them, and extrapolating, if you made that decision, what are the knock-on effects, good and bad. And I think a lot of the time, futurists don't really want to discuss the bad options. I mean,
Mm, okay.
if you look at a lot of stuff that is written online, there's a lot of hyperbole, and they always follow the hyperbole curve. So I'm a futurist, and I'm going to talk about augmented reality. And I will always talk about the positive side of augmented reality. I can do augmented reality shopping, and my surgeons are going to do it, and surgery, and it's going to be great, and shopping is going to be amazing, and driving is going to be great, and all this kind of sort of thing. But then nobody really wants to tackle the thornier questions, which is, well, what about the data privacy side of things? What are the darker aspects if we run towards this future with open arms? Um, there's lots of different possibilities here, and the other thing as well is that the tendency to embrace technology means that the technologists are in control of that future, and a lot of the time, nobody seems to want to discuss or recognize that individuals still have agency. I can
Mm,
still, me as an individual and you as an individual and every single one of your listeners has agency to say, well, actually, I don't really want that for myself. And I don't want that future. And as exciting as it may sound, it doesn't fit with me. And it might lead us to things that we don't want, you know, and we seem to be rushing towards the futures that are painted by dystopian movies and TV shows. And I know what that's going to look like. So I don't want that. So,
mm,
but I think it's very easy and it's very easy to take an apathetic view and say, um, well, I'm just one person and they're the billionaires, so they know better than me. Well, no. If a billion people stood up and said no, then the 1 billionaire is going to sit up and take notice.
mm.
And that's the thing, is that collectively we have far, far bigger voice in what the future looks like than the 3 or 4 billionaires or corporations that want to define it for us. So that's my view of futurism, which is making people aware that they have an agency and a stake in the future, presenting them with multiple options because there is not one future, there are multiple futures to choose from. And it's understanding the good and the bad out of those particular paths and extrapolating the impacts of those decisions that we take to get there.
So I guess, I mean, there's a couple of, I guess, branching questions there. I guess the first one is, how do we do that? So I think I do a lot of war game testing with ideas, right? What happens if this? What happens if that? Play two opposite sides against each other. Um, but I think, there's certain things like AI, right? That's a word of choice at the moment. Everything's AI. And how, if you've got me as a one man band or a million people, it feels like something like the AI is getting pushed on us. It does feel like it's very much this is a wave. You either ride it or you're under it. Um, how does someone push back on that? How do we do that? You've seen the thing with the AI now saying we need a six month breaker on AI, and like, because we need to get our arms around it and understand it. I'm on the fence with whether that's good or bad. But I guess, how do you push back on things? How do you do that?
Yeah, I think so. The first thing is educate yourself. I mean, if you have something that has, that you can see has a material impact on individuals, on society, and on civilization as a whole, no matter what country you're in, then the real idea is to actually start educating yourself on taking an interest in the deeper philosophical and economic kind of subjects and topics around that particular trend. Um, because there will be societal impacts. There were societal impacts with the industrial revolution and things like that. And obviously there were there were beneficial economic impacts, but there were also negative ones in terms of job loss and things like that. And I mean, it's the same with the coal industry as well in the UK. That entire towns were built around that particular industry, and then when that industry collapsed, so did those towns, and that became a socio-economic nightmare for the townspeople in general and the local economies and communities. And it's the same if you look at AI, for example, and call centers. How many cities in the UK have been built around swathes of industrial estates filled with
Mm,
call center buildings? And now, people are saying, well, we can replace people, human workers with um, first and second line human workers with an AI who will answer queries from a customer, which means we no longer need a building filled with 5,000 people. We could probably do it with 500 people.
mm,
And right, so you think, well, that's that's a lot of jobs that are being displaced, and those people have only one real skill, which was to do customer service. But it's not just that; it's that you now have not just job loss, but you have buildings that are
mm,
empty. You have local communities that surrounded that no longer able to generate income because those people don't exist to go out and buy food and lunch
yeah.
and shopping and things like that were all built around those areas. So it's having that broader mindset, I think. It's not just a case of, well, it'll affect me in this way. It's I think a lot of people don't. The litmus test for me is whenever I see people go, oh, this is great, blah blah blah. It's like stand in the supermarket and just stand there for half an hour and observe life. And I don't think people observe life anymore. The life that
Mm,
goes on around them. Okay, so if I stood in a supermarket, and people are going, industry pundit, oh yeah, it's going to be the greatest thing in the world. People are going to be doing this, that, and the next thing, and it's going to improve their lives and their job opportunities and stuff. And then I stand in a supermarket for half an hour and I say, there's probably not one person in the supermarket who's going to be affected in a positive light because they have far greater things to worry about. How am
mm,
I getting food on the table? I can't afford next month's electricity bill. Oh God, my job is shit. The kids are nipping my head. I can't afford to repair the car this month. I've got I've got a bust tire, washing machine's broken down, blah blah blah. That is life, okay? And I think because of this rhetoric is coming from the technology sector and Silicon Valley, and it is an echo chamber. It's a microcosm of what happens in the world around us. But people seem to think that microcosm equals the world. It's like Twitter. It's like, oh my God, Twitter's on a rampage, and the Labour is going to win the next election, and it's like, well, Twitter is not the UK, or if they say, oh, Trump is going to win the next election and Joe Biden gets in, and it's like, well, Twitter is not the US. People
mm,
seem to think that their echo chamber represents everything. And
mm.
this is what I'm saying. People need to get outside a little bit more, touch grass, observe what goes on around them, and then see the real impacts of what's going on and how far reaching those impacts probably will be and probably won't be.
Yeah,
Like VR and AR, again, who wants to wander about? You look in the supermarket and then you could probably identify, I don't know, in half an hour, one person who would want to wander around with a set of goggles on, trying to that will tell them where the milk aisle is.
yeah. Oh, it's so true. It's so true. The building one's a really interesting one for me. And I think there's probably two ways of what I look at this one is you've got the buildings, and I looked at this when COVID came along. I was like, right, all these people are not in work right now. The homeless are still homeless. Like all of a sudden, people have gone, oh shit, we don't need these big buildings anymore. Or we do, we need a scaled down version. How we work has changed a lot. But then I was like, right, well, surely there's lots of buildings here that have 3 to 5 year leases. Like, surely there's something around social impact, what businesses
Mm.
could have done there. We could have leaned into it. But then I go, no, policy. Policy gets in the way of doing anything good a lot of the time. And I just think the building opportunities like you mentioned there is just a really missed opportunity, I think, in some respects.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Canary Wharf, for example, I think is it HSBC is about to abandon
Mm,
Canary Wharf. I think it's been on the cards for a long time, but now they've pulled the trigger on it. Like, how do you fill a building that size?
yeah,
Especially after the pandemic and everybody's doing like work from everywhere, work from home situation. That building is just going to sit empty.
yeah.
And what do you do with it? Of course, they'll not look at the social impact side of things and say, well, we could fill half that building with and make it homeless shelters or affordable housing and stuff like that. No, they're not going to do that because the corporate landlord will make no money out of it. So
Mm,
yeah, like you say, policy and greed, I think, gets in the way of a lot of things.
yeah, it's a great shout. I think there was a hotel near me, so I'm based in Manchester. Um, I think it was called, I can't remember the hotel name, but in COVID they opened up their hotels, they bought lots of buildings, and we just said, homeless people, they're not being used. And I know they had a load of kickback from the council going berserk at them. And it was just like, you can't do right for wrong in some
Yeah.
respects. Um, but it kind of got me thinking about the whole AI thing. And I know, I mean, I'm not even a futurist, but I'm sick of hearing about it, if I'm honest. But there's something around, oh, it's going to take all our jobs. I'm like, no, it'd probably just take middle management jobs. Like it'd probably take my job. Like it's not gonna. I don't think it's gonna take a nurse's job
Mm.
or someone who actually does some stuff. Like it'll probably take the middle management where you're like, there's probably no reason why you need to exist anyway in this world. But yeah, what's your take on kind of the whole AI is going to take all the jobs in the world and that's it, job done?
I think if you're in knowledge work or a white collar job, you're going to be affected. I think if you're in a skilled trade or a skilled profession, like you say, doctors, nurses, um, blue collar stuff, then you're going to be safe for a while, a lot longer than you will digitally, I guess, and physically, because the general purpose robots are coming, but they're nowhere near going to be skilled enough to duck under, pull out my washing machine and fix the plumbing and then put it back again. That's just nonsense, or do the electricity. So blue collar skilled professions are still going to be around for a long time. The interesting thing that I noticed was that back in the 90s or so, I mean, pretty much every government was pushing everybody to learn digital skills and things like that, and then we were all coding them, data entry and things like that, and learning how to use computers. And of course, now we're at 30 years later, and they're the very skills and jobs that are the easiest to automate now, because all we're doing is filling in forms on a
Mm,
computer. And that's what AI is going to be really good at, which is automating a lot of those really mundane tasks and decisions. And like you say, there's actually a double impact here. So knowledge work and white collar work, especially using PCs and computer systems and software, is going to be disrupted. But the other thing that's going to be disrupted is the ability to get an entry level job, because obviously entry level jobs will be taken over by AI. So how do you get an entry level job? Well, your entry level criteria suddenly jumps a little bit higher.
yeah.
So your bottom rung of the career ladder is no longer available. So you're having to reach a little bit higher. Now, the interesting point that you've made is, middle management. Yeah, there's a huge fatty layer of middle management that doesn't need to exist. So, and what are they going to be doing? Well, they're going to be looking, supervising over an AI's job. Well, you don't really need a middle manager to do that. So that middle layer of the career ladder is gone. So suddenly you have this weird career ladder where there are no real entry level jobs that people leaving school or university can do without experience. And then there's this middle layer of management jobs that will disappear, which means the people that are between them actually find it harder to progress to the exec level, because they needed that managerial position
Mm.
and those skills to get to VP, SVP, senior, very senior level positions. So that's going to be interesting. So I think the way that the business operating model and the hierarchy of an organization is going to look in the next 5 to 10 years could look vastly different than it does
Mm.
today, because of that,
So
because of AI.
I think you start going, right, well, okay, you've got these people and there's a gap, what they've got to bridge, they've got to jump over this gap now what exists. How does someone even, like you say, how does someone get that experience? I mean, you go, oh, maybe we just have to do longer at uni, but then you go, that's a flawed system. Education in general and units in general is a flawed system. So
Yeah.
that doesn't support. Um, so then at a board level, and this kind of actually by pure design, leads me on to, I think it was a TED talk what I watched. AI as a board member, I think it was. Probably got the title wrong. But you did that, right? Like that kind of
Mm.
whole thing around as a board member. And I will put it all in the show notes for sure. But yeah, maybe share that because it kind of links around that whole piece at the higher level. Like what does that look like? So yeah,
Yeah.
if you could share a little bit about that.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because I thought, apart from marrying my wife as the memorable moment, and then obviously having my kids, if you want to do it on the life side, I think giving that TED talk was probably the one that should go in that box,
Okay, nice.
because I can do I can do talks to 100 people, I can do talks to 500 people in industry conferences, and you always know your audience. Whereas a TED talk, that TED talk in Glasgow was in front of 2,000 people, and they were all walks of life there. And that was probably the most nerve wracking but exhilarating talk I gave, because I had, I had to give a talk about AI to people who may have no idea what AI
Mm,
is, may have some preconceptions of what AI is, maybe, you know, are old, young, middle aged, all that kind of sort of thing. And it was an honor, but it was such a great experience to do that. Um, but yeah, talking, picking back up on the AI in the boardroom. I mean, there are examples of that. There's a Chinese, are they called NetDragon? A Chinese game company that has appointed an AI CEO, and apparently its stock jumped 12% over the first 6 months that this
shit.
AI was in control and was making certain financial decisions. Um, and then there were, and there's a VC. I can't remember. It begins with an E, but there's a VC firm that uses an AI or an algorithm called Mother Brain that basically helps it predict which startups that's being approached, which ideas are most likely to get them the greatest return. There's been a couple of hedge funds that have used an AI in the boardroom, in inverted commas, again to support financial decisions, etc. So, um, you know, AI in the boardroom is not going to be an uncommon thing, you know, as we progress. It's probably going to be the norm. I can't see that, I can't see there. Jack Ma basically said, and I said this during the TED talk. Jack Ma said, in the next 30 years, he expects, an AI to be, CEO of the year in Time magazine. Um, I can't, could I see that in 30 years? Yeah, but probably, absolutely, in 30 years' time, because in 30 years' time, we probably would have reached AGI, artificial general intelligence, where there's something as creative as we are on every level and understands the world in the same capacity. Because 30 years is a long time, um, and they're already predicting, AGI by 2045. So that gives you some idea of how quickly things are moving at the moment.
It's interesting. If you asked me this a few years ago, I'd be like, I like to look into the future and just enjoy the thought exercise of it more than anything.
Mm,
Um, but then you look at Copilot right now. That's a really watered down version of it, right? Like it's a Buddha. It's a thing.
mm.
And I sometimes think, and I don't even want to talk about AI today, to be honest. But here we are. But there's something around kind of actually, I think I was reading something around AI is your next girlfriend, and like the
Mm.
whole therapy, the whole coaching, the whole kind of industries. Surely they're gonna hit a bit of a oof moment with AI, right? I mean, most of the time it's just it's a circular conversation. I think maybe I'm wrong, but it feels like it's a circular conversation right now with AI. You say it, it says it back. You say it says it back. But I guess I don't know. Do you see them kind of falling over eventually? I guess when it moves a bit more progressive, maybe.
Um, so I think the humanities will come to the fore a lot more here, um, and people will start to understand the value of those subjects. So when you talk about therapy, I mean, my wife's a psychotherapist, and we have deep discussions about this. Um, and she wrote a piece around why using ChatGPT as a therapist is actually really, really dangerous.
Mm,
And it's dangerous because it does not understand context. It doesn't understand your situation. It doesn't understand empathy or emotion. Um, it's just very good at articulating and using certain words and phrases to make you anthropomorphize and think to yourself, "Oh, it does know me."
gets me.
Well, it doesn't, and it's very, and I find that there will probably be a very big mental health crisis in the wings if this is not addressed now.
Mm,
And if it's not addressed by the humanities coming forward and saying, hey, hang on a minute here, we've got um, psychology, psychotherapy, we've got the sociologies and all this kind of sort of thing. We need to look at what's going on here, and we need to sort of present some guardrails, and not regulation, but guardrails and safeguards around people who are using this. There are already examples where people who were using AI girlfriends and boyfriends in inverted commas and having relationships or becoming very involved with these things because, like you say, they're very good at affirming what you want them to say.
Mm.
uh,
Yeah.
you know, you know, and form relationships, and you think you're actually getting bona fide, confidant when it's not really. It doesn't care either way. Um, and the thing to remember, especially for your listeners here, is that you're not in control of any aspect of this at all. The people who develop the systems and platforms with one tweak of the algorithm can completely alter the inverted commas personality that you've been used to. So this was reported, I think, in Washington Post or Wall Street Journal. Can't remember which one, where people who were heavily involved with AI relationships suddenly had the rug pulled under them because the algorithm got tweaked, and the girlfriend or boyfriend in question no longer was recognizable or no longer wanted to do the things that the other party um, would tell it to do, and you can understand where that goes.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, these people became highly emotionally dependent, and in the space of 24 hours, suddenly had their world crash in on themselves. So it's really dangerous to apply AI in a very human way at the moment. Um, and I see, like I said, I see that there's a hidden mental health crisis coming as a result of this because all these platforms and these startups who are coming out of the woodwork unregulated and creating these apps and AI bots, chat bots, and things like that with therapy or coaching or girlfriend relationship advice, um, and leading people down a path that they have no control over.
Do you think we're going to see a spike? I guess we kind of hear about this now. This kind of whole switching off, digital detox, being away from technology, being away from whatever. I mean, thinking about the girlfriend, thinking about even when I go back to being a child, right? You had the Tamagotchi back in the day. Right? It's
Hmm.
like you got attached to this thing. It's like it's a game. It's literally. Um, do you think we'll see a more of a spike of this needs to be uber connected, always on? I mean, we see it already, but do you think there's going to be a I don't know a backside of that, which is like people need to disconnect. People need to become, like, going back to your point, more human, more
Hmm.
connected, more observational. Or do you think it's just going to continue to like hockey stick up and just get more and more connected, more and more in it?
Well, I mean, if you look at what Microsoft has done with Copilot, I mean, Microsoft has essentially put AI into Windows, and that's it. I mean,
Mm,
how many desktop or how much of the world runs on
yeah,
Windows infrastructure, and now all of a sudden it's got AI baked into it. You have no option but to engage with it now, whether it's during your personal life or whether it's a part of your work. You will use it. That's it. It's part of life now. Um, so to to say I'm going to have to disconnect and live without it's almost like becoming a Mormon or a Quaker. It's not going to happen.
yeah,
Um, and I can't see society fracturing like that. I think being able to step back and recognize that this is a thing that you control rather than that thing controlling you, that's the I think that's the question
yeah,
that we must ask ourselves is, do I want my life to be controlled by an algorithm and it tells me what to do during the day and it plans everything out for me and and I don't have to think about it? Or do I still want to retain, again, goes back to the agency question. Do I still
Mm,
want to retain individual agency over my life and the decisions that I make, and just use this thing as a tool to help me understand what the impact of those decisions could be longer term,
yeah.
but not dictate what my life should look like?
Do you think we'll see a bit of a like, you have Android, you have Apple, and I guess the way I kind of think about this is, there's ethics behind it.
Mm.
The Chat GPT ethics versus maybe what if Apple came out and launched their whole AI. Like, do you think you'll see a split, like an ecosystem split, where you go, "Oh, I'm buying into Apple's AI because they buy into my privacy and they buy into." Do you think we're going to get that kind of split?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the whole idea of Skynet and Terminator and one all-encompassing system taking over the world is nonsense, and we've already seen it. We've got Apple, we've got Amazon, we've got Facebook, we've got Microsoft. You've got hundreds of startups all wanting you to use their particular tools. You've got the big software vendors developing their own. You'll have every corporation or every business, excuse me, looking to develop their own AI and LLM systems that understand their business rather than hand that data over to someone else to do. So, yes, I mean, you've got people who use Microsoft, you've got people who use Apple, you've still got people who want to use Linux instead. Yes, and you've got people who use Google stuff. So yeah, there's you will be come down to from a personal level, it'll come down to personal preference.
Mm,
And the privacy aspect is going to be a really interesting one. Because Google this week announced that they're going to bake Bard into G Suite, and you'll be able to ask Bard you know where to find specific documents or something across the entire estate, whether it's email, whether it's Google Docs, whether it's slides, whether it's on your G Drive, etc. And that AI is going to be able to find and do things. Now that means that AI has Bard will have access to all of that. Now we all know that Google basically takes everything anyway. So that to me says that Google and Bard, or through Bard, will basically train Bard using everybody's data on their
perfect.
personal stuff. And it could well be on the enterprise level as well, obviously with different caveats and different terms of services. And it's the same with Microsoft Windows. Everything you do now will have some kind of co-pilot um, involvement. And like we've seen before, Microsoft used to send more than just diagnostic information back to its servers when you used its products. So how much of that is going to go back into training, continually training Copilot and AI? And Apple obviously is very much a case of, well, this thing lives on your device and nothing ever leaves the device, you know. And again, could see a split between people using proprietary software, open source software, on device software versus cloud software. And yeah, like I said, no one system is going to rule the world, but there will be an interesting split.
This is fascinating for me. So I wrote a book and it's due out, and when I look at the experience of me writing that book, I did it all through Google Docs, sharing it with the editor, back and forth, back and forth. I'm like, when I think about the example there of
Mm,
Bard, I'm like, the only person I ever wanted to really see that book was me and the editor at that point. But then but something's got to train that in order for it to work. Um, and I think about kind of Apple. Apple did a really smooth trick. They turned privacy into a unique selling point,
mm,
which I really enjoyed. So for you, and I guess the other question which I've got going on is, I use something called Obsidian, which is basically a second brain. You put your thoughts in, it connects your thoughts patterns, but it's all local. It's all local. It's um, what as someone who looks at this in way more detail than me, what is your go-to? Are you in the Apple? Are you outside the Apple ecosystem? What's your
I
where do you
used
sit?
to be Apple, but I didn't like the way certain things were going. So, and I recognize that Apple's products are well over engineered and well overpriced. So I went. I went Google in the sense. So I had a Chromebook for a while. I still use a Pixel. Um, I'm back on Microsoft at the moment. But I have to say, when I saw the Vision Pro um, keynote and then everything around what Apple was doing in terms of ID, so their sort of Apple Wallet is becoming like a central point towards ID verification and things like that. And obviously, I studied what Web3 was doing and what it wasn't doing, obviously. And one of the core tenets of Web3 is obviously decentralized identity, um, zero knowledge proof in terms of what blockchain could achieve, and having wallets as custodians of your data and verifiable information. I see Apple doing something that Web3 should have done a long time ago, but doing it without all the blockchain shenanigans. And I have to say, that's the first time since, I don't know, probably 10 years. First time in 10 years that I've considered going back to Apple purely because of their privacy stance,
Mm.
because of their vision towards spatial computing, which seems a bit more coherent and joined up than anyone else's so far. Um, yeah, and their on-device, privacy, I think is going to be key for those who want to enjoy that.
It's fascinating. I think yeah, from a like I say, the whole marketing that your own privacy as a feature was a slick move from an marketing point of view.
Mm.
And I want to get into kind of more that like the role of a future in just a second. But the killer question before we do that.
Oh
So
no.
your killer question was, what's a one life lesson you learned the hard way? What comes
um,
to mind?
don't employ friends.
Oh, okay, okay. You want to expand on that one for you, or?
Um, I'm not going to use specific examples or name people, obviously.
Hmm.
Um, but I think that a less, and it's funny actually because my mum actually said the same thing probably 30, 40 years ago. Which is don't go into business with friends or with people that you know really well.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it boils down to the trust factor. And you don't really know someone. You think you know them because they're friends, but obviously you don't really know them until you work with them on a day to day basis, and then you see one what they are and aren't capable of, but two just how um, business decisions can change a person, their personality, and it brings out sometimes it brings out the best in them, sometimes it brings out the absolute worst. And then obviously when things don't go well in that particular business situation, um, then you find out who is a friend who would stick with you through thick and thin, and who is a fair weather friend.
Hmm.
So for anyone who is considering like a startup, um, or going into business, or thinking of hiring somebody that they know for something, um, I would ask them, I would ask them to, really, really give it a proper serious consideration, and whether they understand that how that person would react in particular situations, because a business context is very different from an outside situation where you're down the pub going out for a meal, playing sport or something, and casually, and something good or something bad happens. People behave very differently in a business situation, and I think it will catch a lot of people out. So that's one life lesson that I would say I've learned the hard way.
Nice. Right. No, thanks for sharing. It's yeah, there's I do a lot of sense making and observations of human traits, and I think when it comes to kind of me designing experiences, I always kind of use the analogy of a person wears many masks,
Mm.
Danny talking about a dentist versus Danny being in a dentist are very two different versions of Danny. Like,
Yeah.
and yeah, but yeah. Okay, so futurist. I always, when I hear the word futurist, and this is way before I connect to reviews, like, this sounds cool. This sounds like it sounds awesome. And I connect to reviews like, and it's full of cool people. Um, but but for few people out there might not know what that is. What does a day in the life of Theo look like as a futurist?
Um, I mean, I love my position because I get to do multiple different things. I mean, I wear multiple hats. So um, I spend a lot of my time trend watching. So a lot of the time is actually reading. So what is actually coming out? I read research papers, I read commentary and opinion on emerging trends. I spend a lot of time paying attention to people who work in particular industries and just noting what they say. A lot of it, again, a lot of it is observation,
Hmm.
and then extrapolating. The way my head works is it's like it's a tangle of wires, and I'll pull one wire, and then from that wire, another three wires are attached to it that I didn't know were, and it's really just following those threads. So you could, it's like a not a maze. What would it be like? How would I describe it? It is tugging threads and spider webs and things like that. Um, it's also keeping a very open mind of trends and things that could happen in one industry and then seeing how it could apply in some other walk of life. Um, I like to again like I like to be able to recognize a particular trend or topic and say it could start in banking, um, and then say, well, how would that affect pharmaceuticals, or how would that affect healthcare, or how would that affect manufacturing if I took that thing and put it in there and dropped it in that particular ocean? Would it boil? Would it just dissipate, etc.? So it's it's not only just keeping an open mind, but it's also keeping a mind that there, again, observation, effect of the world as an ecosystem in itself, and how do these trends impact an entire ecosystem that we live in. But a lot of the time is me reading, um, and trying to make sense of what's going on, and then it's I find myself sometimes falling down rabbit holes because it's like, because it'll be a particular word or a phrase or turn of phrase that someone used when they wrote a research piece or when they spoke about it in a podcast or whatever, and I will take that and I will follow that thread and then discover that it exists somewhere else as well, and it's like, right, well, that means that there's two completely disparate connections here out of one thing, and could that extrapolate into a bigger decision? If I said, oh, you must go with this particular trend, would that have a knock-on effect somewhere else that
Okay.
is completely hidden, um, to a casual observer? So um, it's no two days are different, are the same. I mean, I could be writing, I could be preparing for a keynote, I could be taking an advisory hour with someone who just wants to talk for an hour, about a particular. I did one recently for a consultancy, and it was literally, I want to discuss this topic. I can't tell you who the client is, etc., but I want you to talk about digital transformation and why something won't work.
Mm,
And during that conversation, he was like, "That's the nugget. That's what I was
I
wanting to
think.
hear." It was just literally me off the cuff talking about particular things and why some things don't happen. He goes, "That's what's wrong with that particular client," and that for me is a lot of it's serendipity. Um, a lot of the time, I would say luck and serendipity, or happenstance, whatever you want to call it, is a big part of how I regard futurism, because it's that discovery of something that I didn't know that I needed to discover purely by accident. When I'm doing my research, it's very hard to describe. I don't work the same way as a normal futurist because there's very rigid and regimented in terms of lots of process and lots of research methods and things like that. Whereas I tend to borrow things that work for me. Like I say, right at the start, I've got a kit bag of experience because I like to do different things. And that's how I've approached life a lot of the times, which is I'll do different things because then it gives me a broad appreciation of different tools and methods and ways of thinking at my disposal.
Yeah. See, I love this, and this really hits home for me. It's interesting in work culture, future of work, whatever you want to call it. There seems to be this big thing of making people fit in a box. I'm like, no,
Mm,
surely you want this multidiscipline, this curious thinker, this person who can't fit in the box because they're connecting farming with banking or whatever it is. And I think there's something around. I think one of the biggest skills of the future is that it's the thing of not being able to fit in a box and being able to connect really disconnected things and then making sense of the threads. And there's an element of um, the only thing what comes to mind is like a clue hunting, like a detective. Like you're following clues which often you seem to not make any sense in that
mm.
moment. Um, nice, nice. So this one leads us on to the book in just a second, but I guess the metaverse, is it dead as a dodo or is it kind of like the future starts now with that?
Yeah, we were chasing the wrong thing with the metaverse. Um, so a lot of people regarded the metaverse as a single destination, an online destination that I must go to, just like a website. But it's 3D, it's online, it's an immersive virtual world. Whereas I saw the metaverse as basically a culmination of everything, everywhere, all at once. I could be on the web, I could be on an app, I could be wearing augmented reality, I could be fully immersed in VR, um, or I could be in a 3D world online kind of sort of thing. But um, the I could choose to experience something in either reality. Someone else could choose to experience something in a complete the same thing in a completely different version of their reality, but we're both there at the same time. So you could be wearing augmented reality, and I could be just viewing something on the web, but we're both there at the same time experiencing it, but just in different realities. And that to me was what the metaverse was. But as soon as it came out and as soon as the hype started, everybody was pouring money into basically Roblox type and Minecraft type environments
Yeah.
and 3D stuff. And it was a symptom of the pandemic as well and work from home, where it's like, oh, everybody needs an avatar and we're going to a virtual office and we'll all collaborate. And it's like, no, this is just nonsense. Um, and and in a way, seeing what Apple has done and turned it into, and obviously spatial computing has been around for a long time as well, the concept, but spatial computing is a paradigm that's as close to what the real metaverse is that anything else that I've seen so far, because it is a mix of realities. So that's what I see as what the metaverse is. I've wrote about on a number of occasions, and I speak about this as well. But it's not the Minecrafts and or the Second Life. Second Life is an online world. It's not the metaverse either. It's not Snow Crash from oh god, the name escapes me now. But it's not the vision that was driven out of Snow Crash because it's a novel that was 30 years old. We should not be basing a technological revolution around one book that someone wrote as a science fiction novel. Um, so it's yeah, the metaverse isn't dead. It just hasn't properly manifested itself yet.
Okay. Okay, that's good. That's good. So then this links me onto the book. the future starts now. I guess two big questions. What was that like as an experience, being involved in writing that book? And I guess, yeah, should people still buy that book now? Is the future still now? Does it still stand up even now, today?
Um, so the funny thing about writing a book is that it's a statement and at a point in time.
Hmm.
Nothing dates faster than a book or technology actually as well. Um, but the process itself. I mean, when we pitched the book, um, it was something that the publisher hadn't done before, which was a collection of voices, almost like an anthology, and every chapter was written by someone different. And the reason behind that was that I didn't want to just be about my opinion on a
Hmm.
particular topic. Um, and and so we collected a very different and diverse group of voices from as many corners of the world as we could find, from as many different sort of ethnicities and opinions on a very broad set of topics. So we talk about AI, we talk about the future of money, we talk about space, we talk about commerce, we talk about education, talk about flying cars and things, transport and things like that. And these are topics that I'm not an expert in any of them, in a majority of them. But it's good to get uh, an expert or someone more versed in that, and then have them express that in their own unique style of voice. So every reader will experience a particular topic written in a particular way by someone with a particular slant. Um, and it was written during the pandemic, so we were fortunate because obviously everybody had a lot of downtime during that period. So it was really like herding cats. There's no other way to describe it. It's like herding cats, getting everybody to write their manuscript or their chapter manuscript in time, putting it all together, doing the basic editing, sending it off to the editor, getting the revisions back, agreeing those revisions, coming back, wrapping it all up. Writing a couple of forewords, getting some people to write forewords and stuff like that. That's it was a great example of project management in a
Hmm.
sense, because it was a project, and it's always great to see the end result, you know,
Yep.
as well.
It's interesting. So I can see it right on my bookshelf. So I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it as a book. And for me, it, like you say, there's lots of there's chapters in there for people who've never heard of them. And it kind of just opened my network. Oh, I connect to this person. They've probably got
Mm.
either opinions what I align to, or opinions what I completely go against. So both equally valuable. Um, is there any plans to do another book?
Um, so I've been mulling the idea of accelerated transformation. So I spoke about this at a CAP Gemini leadership event a couple of weeks back. Um, and the idea of hyper change or accelerative transformation. So we have business transformation, we've had digital transformation, um, but these are concepts that are as old as the hills now, and we really are at a point where transformation is accelerating faster than a lot of organizations can keep up now, because there are so many different technologies that we have treated in silos, that if you um, um, what's the term? Begins with a C. Convergence. I'm a firm believer in convergence of technologies rather than treating them as silos. So digital transformation has always been, we're going to do cloud, we're going to do AI, we're going to do whatever, and they've always been done as one project in a silo. Another project comes along, takes no regard of what happened in the last one, layers something on top, and you get a complete clusterfuck in legacy. Whereas convergence looks at actually holistically what technologies can actually work together that can produce something exponential in terms of change. And that is something that I might write about as a next book. And I would probably tackle that myself.
Nice, nice. Well, when you do that, by all means, come back on the show for sure. Um, so I guess there's kind of a question here, and I originally wrote it as what's the most kind of the big emerging trend, but you're the most excited about. But I guess we can either go with that question, or there's a one which is, what does the future of work look like? And I guess, yeah, which one of them two would you like to take for you?
I mean, I could take a bit of both. I mean,
Okay.
what am I really excited about? I'm actually like I think I touched on this. I'm really excited about seeing the humanities and the arts um, being valued a lot more as we push further into technology, and especially automation with AI. Excuse me, with AI, um, because the value of being a human comes from those particular types of subjects, from philosophy, from thinking, from arts, from understanding how people tick, etc. And I think these have become more valuable. And the same with like professional trade skills as well, because we've always been, we've been hunters, we've been builders, we've been gatherers, we've been farmers, etc., etc. And AI and an IoT cloud and augmented reality is not going to get us to the moon. Humans will get us to the moon through ingenuity, through creativity, through hard work, through perseverance, through hardship, through building things, you know, um, and and it's that kind of human spirit that I'm more excited about than AI
Mm,
coming forward. In terms of the future of work, well, that's a really open question because of the changes that we're seeing today. I see, I do see some great upheavals over the next sort of 10, 15 years. Um, I see a lot of socioeconomic problems as a result of that. So, we'll see, working from home or working from anywhere, or certainly more flexible ways of working is here to stay. We've seen that.
mm,
Doesn't matter that the organizations are trying to force workers back into the office. I think, you know, workers will choose to leave and find organizations that support their way of life now. There's no such thing as a work life balance anymore, I don't think. People will create whatever balance that they see fit that suits them, and then they'll seek an organization that will support that. And perhaps emerging technologies like AI will enable a lot of that as well. But at the same time, it will devastate, large swathes of the population who can't handle that kind of level of change.
mm,
Like I said, like I was talking about in the beginning, when the banks first started using PCs, there were people who were utterly clueless about how to transition to using a PC. Some of them, took to it like a duck to water. Some of them were sort of wary about it and tried, and some of them were utterly resistant to it. I've always worked a different way, or I've done things my way, and I don't want this. This is too much change. Um, and that's gonna, AI is gonna impact people in that way. We're seeing it already in the creative industries where there's a massive backlash because of artists and writers and etc. who have had all their work plagiarized to essentially train this stuff, and now they're seeing their livelihoods being taken away,
mm,
and through no fault of their own. And there just doesn't seem to be a connective understanding about the impact that will have societally. If you relinquish creativity to an algorithm, what does that mean?
yeah. It's funny. I kind of think back to like the whole iTunes, the whole Spotify, and
Mm,
you had artists kicking off going, we're not making enough money, and now this is it's a much bigger conversation. Like, what does creativity become? We'll use insert any artist, whoever you like. You go, okay, you train that with enough hours, they start creating their own music, and you go, actually, there's something about protection, right? That whole idea of protecting your IP. I think
mm,
Imogen, I can't remember her name. She did a lot with blockchain at the start, and kind of putting her music on there to try and protect it a little bit. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's a really weird one when I think about creativity. It's like the most exciting thing, and also the most worrying thing, I think, from a creativity point of view. For me personally, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, so couple of interesting examples. Obviously, in the sort of Web3 blockchain space, a lot of people have been trying to use, or a lot of artists have been trying to use NFTs to make money for themselves. So publishing albums and songs as an NFT with some added benefits because they're not getting the same recompense and royalties from streaming
Mm,
platforms. But of course, that's like a step backwards in terms of a consumer's point of view. Because why should I pay $5.99 for a single song when I'm paying $9.99 a month to get
yeah,
millions of songs? So from a consumer point of view, there's a great level of apathy because it's like, why do I care? I'm getting convenience for a monthly sum, and I don't really care. Um, and it's the same with like the AI and art situation and the creative side because we saw it with the Secret Invasion with Marvel. If anyone watched that show, the title credits were done by Midjourney, I think,
okay,
purely, yeah, by, and you could tell it was AI generated.
right,
Um,
okay.
and there was huge backlash from the art community, especially people who had worked with Marvel in the past on their movies. Um, but I guess if you asked the average person who doesn't know that this is going on and watch the TV show, they'd be like, eh, cool intro, bit weird, but yeah, it kind of works. They don't care.
Yeah.
So there's again, it's like there's a massive disconnect between in terms of education, in terms of what AI is doing, how it's affecting other people versus how it's being consumed by
Mm.
people who just don't know and don't care, frankly.
Well, it's the Amazon problem, right? Like, Amazon don't necessarily treat the staff great,
Mm,
but actually, the reason why we do that is because I can get my Prime package the next day. And
yeah,
it's a really horrible situation. You want that thing of being able to get your parcel the next day, but you know full well the people in the Amazon warehouses are getting run down. My brother did a stint there. He just finished uni, I think, he just did a few months there waiting for something else to start up. And he said it was, and my brother's a really, really grafter. And he said it was the worst experience of his life.
right.
But I still ordered stuff next day on Prime. It's like, it's a
Yeah.
real tricky one to kind of balance up. Um, and the future of work is a fascinating one for me. So I was actually chatting to someone yesterday, can't say who, because I'm very, very over the top by mentioning their name. Um, but there's like we're forcing people back in. Two companies it was. One was forcing them to do saying it's hybrid, and it was 4 days in the office. I'm like, that's not hybrid.
Mm,
And then the other one, they're forcing them 3 days in London. I'm like, why? I'm like, what you're going to create is not many companies can compete with you as a brand. You're too big of a company. You're big as a company. Everyone loves you. Like you are a solid company. And if the people who are there have nowhere to go, so all you're going
mm,
to do is create this culture rot inside out. We're going to have nowhere to go. We're going to come in the office, and your culture is going to rot inside out because you're forcing this thing
yeah.
back in. Um, it's going to be fascinating to watch how cultures pivot with that and adapt, or then which just fall under the pressure of it, and we go, oh shit, maybe bringing people back into work and forcing them back into it wasn't the right thing to do.
Yeah. It's interesting because from a cultural point of view, these companies will more often than not um, pay higher salaries to price their workers out of the market, right? And I know one particular software company that does this, um, and it's almost like a cult mentality in a sense because I'm being paid an awful lot more money than you, so I must be a lot better, and this company is great. But it also means that if you ever wanted to leave, you're going to get paid an awful lot less, and people will, and your skills might not actually be that valuable to anyone anyway. So you kind of feel trapped to do your tenure in one company and get your gold watch and pat in the back and a wee certificate from the CEO kind of thing. And that might be a either a symptom or a cause of this kind of sort of work from the office mentality where it's like, well, I don't really care what goes on. You're coming into the office, but I'll give you a little bit more money, but it means that you can never leave because no one's going to pay you the same amount as we do.
Yeah, the good old golden handcuffs.
Yeah.
I have two more questions for you, I guess, and then we can kind of, yeah, we're coming to the end. So obviously, my world is predominantly in kind of people experience and culture. What advice would you give to someone who's new coming into the world of work now? Whether it be how where we look to go for the roles, or what they should be looking in at now, so they're primed for a couple of years when they hit work. What tips would you give for someone?
So one thing, I've given a couple of university lectures and talks and sat down with students before. One of the things that I've noticed as a trend is that students are not told the basics of networking or how to put themselves out there other than a CV and things, because it's just it's just basic sort of life skills that are not taught. They literally come to the end of the university course or whatever and thrown to the wolves and asked to survive. Um, and networking is probably one of the greatest skills that you can have in a sense. And just being curious and asking questions of people in your industry. I mean, there's nothing wrong, like this is why platforms like LinkedIn and Glassdoor and all this kind of sort of thing exists, because they exist to allow you to find information and find like-minded people and ask the questions in order to be better prepared to enter the workforce for one. And people, you'll find that people are actually quite receptive to answer questions if you're not begging for a job, for example. If you're genuinely curious about either a workplace or just the industry in general that you've chosen, reaching out to someone in that industry and just saying, hey, I'm doing this course, I'm about to leave next year or in 6 months' time. I'd really love to know your experience of when you entered, for example,
Mm,
and how you got your first job and stuff like that. And are there any pointers? And you'll find that people are willing, as long as you say, could you spare me a coffee tomorrow? Kind of nonsense. People are willing to spend half an hour online or on a phone call and to chat to you if they can spare it. I think the second thing as well is obviously with what's happening in the world today, you have to learn something about how to manipulate AI in your particular profession. And I do feel sorry for people coming into higher education right now, um, and choosing a profession or a career that could potentially be highly disrupted by the time they leave education, and also being part of a university that does not want to embrace AI as part of the curriculum. So teaching them the old parrot fashion, read a book, write me an essay, answer questions, do a thesis, blah, blah, and doesn't want anything to do with AI or large language models or using it in the particular industry. Because that's just going to put students on the back foot, to be honest, and not prepare them. So if you're in a university that doesn't support it or doesn't recognize it or doesn't embrace it, then I would think twice about that university. Um, and then I would take it on my own back to learn about
mm,
how to use these tools. And there's free education out there. In fact, Microsoft and OpenAI and Google, etc., all have their own official courses. So it's not like you have to go to LinkedIn and find some dodgy thought leader in inverted commas with a webinar series that you have to pay $250 for and get nothing out of. You can actually go straight to the source and learn from that how to do prompts, how to manipulate large language models to get queries, how to recognize when something doesn't look factually correct, because these things will spit something out and it will look very correct because it seems very articulate. But the other thing I think that will teach people is to be critically analytical about what they're being
mm.
told. Um, and that's a skill in itself that's missing in in life now. It's just been critical thinking. So yeah, learn a bit of AI for yourself, learn about it in your profession, how it's been deployed in your industry, and just network the fuck out of put yourself out there. My wife, for example, when she was um, applying for placements in psychotherapy, um, she did research. I mean, it's basic stuff. I didn't tell her how to do it, but it was basic stuff, which is I did research about the organization. I applied it to that research about the organization to what my interests were in the course that I was doing. And then I wrote a cover letter along with my CV.
Mm.
Um, and I hate cover letters and I hate CVs and I will no longer use them because that's just me and I'm too old for that kind of shit now. But I think if you put the time in, it doesn't cost you anything to put the time in because the results at the end of it means that you stand out over people who are sending their CV in. And there was a guy in her course who was actually mailing his CV to these people saying, "Can I get a placement?" And she's like, "What the fuck are you doing?" You know, so it just shows you the difference in mentalities and
Mm.
what can better prepare you for getting that first gig.
Nice, nice. So I kind of lied. I have two questions, but the quick, the quick. um, so obviously, and the question comes from hearing you talk about network. I follow you, but I guess who's three or four other futurists, if you like, or people who are stretching your thinking, you think people should follow on LinkedIn?
Um, so my co-author Bronwyn Williams, very very smart lady, mad as a hatter, South African, lives in Joburg. She's great, very very switched on. Um, Tracy Fellows is another sort of futurist who's very switched on, talks a lot about the future of identity and how that is wrapped up at the moment. Um, and a couple of sort of really thought provoking people. So is Zoe Scaman or Scammon. Um, she talks a lot about the customer experience or consumer experience, influencer trends, um, highly intuitive in terms of what brands are doing and what the future of brand engagement is with people and communities, and communities of people, user generated content, etc. Really switched on woman, and highly respect what she says. And then Tom Goodwin, who he's like Marmite. You either love him or hate him, but I think he sees a lot of things. He's another great observer of things that go on, and he's not afraid to say, "Well, this looks stupid. Why are we
Mm,
doing this?" And it's day to day stuff that we take for granted, like going to the airport and stuff like that, going to the shops, ordering blah. Why do customer service emails have no reply to blah 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 kind of thing? Don't they want to know what my opinion is? Why can't I buy something from Pinterest? It's literally the greatest shopping browsing webs app that you can get. You can't buy shit from it.
mm,
That kind of thing. It's just great observations. So some good rounded people there. I think
nice. I think did Tom do the book Digital Taoism?
Darwinism. Yeah, he
Yeah,
did.
damn it. Yeah, yeah. Um, so right at the start, I asked you what you wanted to be when you grew up, and Theo, we never really stopped growing up. If I was to ask you today, Theo, what do you want to be when you grow up? What would you say?
I'm grown up. Yeah. Um, I still don't have any idea what I want to do when I grow up. I mean, I've fallen into this role because, like I say, I'm a deep nerd, and it just steeps me in everything that I'm really interested in and have been interested in since childhood. Science fiction, technology, always thinking about the future and things like that, and life in the future. Um, But I still don't know. If is there something beyond this? There probably is, but I've got no idea where it will lead me. And that I like not having that predestination or that predeterminism of thinking, oh, I have a career choice and I'm going to make it happen. I like life to just evolve around me, and that means my career decisions evolve as I do things as well.
Nice, nice. Theo, where can people keep up to date with you? Where can they connect with you? Where can they read? I know the answers, but I want you to tell us because I do all this. I stalk you like some sort of weird human. But yeah, tell us where people can follow you.
Yeah, I mean, I've got my website, which is theopriestley.com, and that's where I kind of just have myself out there for speaking gigs and so forth. I'm on LinkedIn. You find me on Theo Priestley, and I'll post occasionally interesting thoughts and things that I find there. I'm on Twitter still until it basically dies a death. Um, and I mainly just shit post there now, actually. I think because I've gotten to the stage with social media and social networks that I'm tired of giving it my best, giving away my best thoughts for free.
Mm,
And they should be reserved for people who want to know what they are. Um, um, and you also find yourself getting a bit lazy in that respect because it's like, oh, I'll just write a quick post on Twitter or LinkedIn, and you fall out of the habit of writing and blogging. Um, so I'm trying to pull back from social media in a sense a little bit just now until I figure out what the next things are.
nice. Theo, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
No, thank you, Danny. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Take it easy, Theo.
You too.